Okay, so here's the final concept of the Shadow Walker creature. This is for a graphic novel by Wendy Brotherland. I'm going to keep this kind of casual. I'm not going to discuss too much about the story itself. So we're going to start off with basically just a very simple background, just reusing a background from a previous design of the same creature. But what I want to do here is keep things as simple as possible in order for me to be able to just work with the colors, the textures, and the skin tone surface texture, figuring out what type of patterns or colors or how the highlights are going to work with this creature. So the easiest way for me to do this is to begin right now by outlining the actual silhouette to the creature. And you'll notice that I'm not going to go any further than the actual outlining of the silhouette itself, because everything that's inside of that isn't important. It's already there within the sketch. Really, the purpose of this is just so I can select the negative space and quickly produce gradient fills and select the negative space and invert it, so that while I'm coloring this, I can really just focus on the actual silhouette and just focus on painting and not have to worry about the edges. Now I'm working on a multiply layer, which enables me to still see my sketch while I'm laying in colors and highlights and shadows. Eventually I'll begin to work above the multiply layer and above the sketch, but I'll take this as far as I can. In this way I can still read into the actual design, the anatomy, and all the basic line work that I had worked up previous to this point. What's nice about this is that I can lay in multiple colors, sort of working along an analogous color scheme, but at the same time I can kind of just throw in what I like to kind of refer to as like a rainbow gasoline of colors. If you look at a spill of gasoline and you look in there, you can see that it's black, it's dark, but there's a rainbow of colors ranging from oranges to yellows to reds to greens, blues. And the reason that I'm starting off this way is because I know that ultimately this creature is going to be very dark. He's going to be sort of slick like oil, and he might have some specular highlights and a kind of shiny surface texture. So all the colors and all the little patterns and textures that I'm laying in at the moment are still going to be shown through, but eventually I'm going to darken the actual skin tone. So as I'm working with the selection tool, and I'm keeping some of those layers where I've selected the entire silhouette, and this way I can keep that on a separate layer and constantly go back to that and just select the negative space and invert it, and just keep going back and fooling around with the colors. A lot of what I'm doing with the colors here is to play into what you see with beetles, bugs. A lot of times if you look at a beetle or a bug that's black in nature, for the most part there's a lot of color that comes in there. Again, that's sort of like that rainbow of colors that you see in gasoline or oil. So all of the details and all of the highlights and everything, whether I'm changing the hues or the overall colors to the color scheme for the creature, all of those little highlights and those textures and those details are still going to remain within. And it really doesn't matter what I do to the overall skin tone. Pretty happy with the skin tone at this point. So what I'd like to do is just focus on the head design at this point. The head is very complex. It has very otherworldly and alien sensory organs. Its mouth construction is extremely complex with multiple different types of uh, large incisors, tusk, and underbite. The eye concept, I wanted it to be almost non-existent, but this is something that's not going to show through unless you were to actually see this creature in motion, because the design of the creature's eye is at the moment covered with a sort of film similar to amphibians, even birds. They have a clear secondary eyelid that will cover the eye for purposes of protection. So I kind of went into the eye design with the notion of not wanting to supply a normal iris, or even an eye that you can actually look at and see any kind of emotion through. So this allows me to keep him very kind of emotionless, very alien, very horrific. You're not really quite sure what to make of the head design. You don't really know where the eyes or sensory organs are at. You kind of just look at it and you see a bunch of teeth and very complex organs. Um, the long, sort of almost catfish-like tendrils that hang down from the face also is partially aesthetic, as well as sensory organs that fit into what this creature or this character can do within the story. I'm not going to get into it too much, but some of the stuff that he can do is sort of teleportation or walking through shadows, telepathy, and other um, sort of supernatural abilities. So at this point now, I'm pretty happy with the colors. I'm happy with where the values are at, and I'm just starting to lay in a few specular highlights, trying to make sense of the forms and the anatomy, working out a little bit more about the bone structure. And what I had kind of wanted for this creature, while I'm working in the skin textures and just playing around with some of the highlighting here, is that ultimately I wanted the creature to be able to run on all fours as a quadruped, but his anatomy should allow him to not shapeshift, but sort of transform so that he can walk upright. And similar to the way that you see the transition of a werewolf and their body kind of breaking and snapping, and the bone structure and the muscle structure is all sort of transforming, but not necessarily shape shifting, would allow him to transition those arms from the position that he's in now as a quadruped to be able to allow him to stand upright and walk around on as a biped. Um, at the moment, what I did was just flip the canvas again, because anytime that you flip the canvas and you mirror it, you're able to see any flaws in the design more easily. And I've noticed here that I didn't quite match up the uh, opposing arm, to kind of mimic the same anatomy or the same proportions to that of his left arm or his right arm. So I just fixed the anatomy at that point, and going back in here now, I'm just sort of rendering in a few additional highlights, a few additional brush strokes of texture, conforming. I'm following uh, the forms and of the body structure too, with some of the line work that I'm producing, some of the textures and the line work, which helps the viewer read into the actual forms and the shapes of the anatomy a little better. Going back to the head again, the head is the most important part of this entire creature, because his brain capacity is far beyond human. His body structure is far beyond that of a human as well. But I didn't really want to just supply the creature with multiple teeth and tusk and everything. I really wanted him to have an interesting cranium, an interesting set of eyes, and other sensory organs. Again, here I'm just fixing some of the mirrored mistakes that you don't otherwise notice easily unless you flip the canvas every once in a while. Again, fooling around with some of the values is something that I do quite often at this point. Because it's coming close to completion, what I'll often do is flatten the entire image, and going back to that silhouette where I select the entire outline of the creature, that allows me to quickly make changes in a duplicate layer where I can change the hues, and then erase out what I don't like about the color changes, or what I do like, keeping certain portions and changing the hues of those colors very quickly. So now it's coming very close to the final product. What I'll do at this point is constantly go back in, change some of the values, the highlights, figure out what's most important about the design. And I kind of get a little nitpicky. I get kind of anal about some of the values or highlights. So what I like to do is, when I'm making these duplicate layers, I'll adjust the values just slightly, and then with that duplicate, I'll go back in and just erase out the areas that I want to let shine through, where I've basically boosted the values a little bit. These are custom brushes that are smoke effect designs, and I could have gone in and I could have painted all of that, but this is just much easier, much quicker, and it's not really the focus of the creature. The creature's a shadow walker, and he's dark, and he's evil, and he's horrific looking, but I'm really just doing that to supply a bit of a background for this creature to pop from. That's the only reason that I've produced any color or any change in values in the background, as you see I'm doing here, is just to allow the creature to better pop out of that background, to allow the highlights and the lighting to work a little bit better. So I've just basically flattened the entire image at this point. I've boosted the values, and then going back in, I'm just erasing out what I liked about those change in values. So this is pretty much it. The design is complete. And again, like I told you, I kind of get nitpicky, but I'll go back in and just, fool around with some of the values, some of the highlights, and anything that I see that might need a little extra attention. And you'll notice here, once it transitions to the final product, I just boosted the values a little bit more, supplied a little bit more of that smoky effect coming off the back and the back of the head, and some additional color into the teeth and the head. I hope you guys enjoyed this. I hope you found it fun and interesting, and please check back soon.